Read yesterday, experts are warning of a possible credit crunch following the government's plan to borrow 570 billion shillings from the local market to bridge the 862.5 billion shillings budget deficit. Ernst and Young tax partner Francis Kamau says commercial banks are likely to prioritize loaning the government than to SMEs and individuals who are considered at credit risk.
I'll take you back to the time Kibaki took over the government in 2002. Of course, what we call the Kibakinomics. And what he basically did in the Kibakinomics is to basically ensure that any amount of debt that the government picks locally is reduced, so that the banks don't rely on basically mopping up any particular amount they have and take to government for treasury bills and bonds and all that. So there was enough credit for the local money, and in fact the banks started hawking that particular time. Of course, having said that, it is a scenario where we're going to see reverse, whereby the government shun the local entities and SMEs, and basically they'll take all their money to which is in a safe place, which is called treasury bills and bonds, so that the government can basically give the interest rates which are a bit higher and safer. And of course, the SMEs are going to suffer so much in terms of access to credit.
Well, that story sets the pace for our conversation here in studio on matters the budget, breaking it down, what the deficit means for Kenyans. Now, Peter Mwanza, a tax partner at Ronald's LLP, is here with me on set. Thank you for joining me, Ronald. Peter, sorry.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
Now, let's just start right there. Yeah. 570 billion, to be borrowed from the local market.
Yeah.
What does it mean? And do you agree with the sentiments of Ernst and Young?
Well, definitely. Of course, when the government is in the field or in the financial markets trying to borrow, what that essentially means is that the banks will prefer lending to the government, because of course we normally say the government is a risk-free borrower. So you can be certain that the government will repay. So that will happen is that it will crowd out the funding that is available to the SMEs, to the individuals like me and you. And of course, certainly that is not good for business. So I fully agree with Kamau.
Right. That's quite interesting, because the budget in itself, it was about improving the livelihoods of Kenyans. But when you look at the nitty-gritties of the budget, it is chalking out the very important SME sector, right?
Yes, I definitely agree on that. Of course, let's start by saying that, of course, being a 3.3 trillion budget, there's a huge increment from the last financial year of around 300 billion. That money will have certainly to come from somewhere. Of course, we have seen that even from the local collection in terms of taxes the last financial year, it was about 2 trillion, or rather thereabout. So it therefore means that there's an extra 300 billion that needs to be collected in terms of taxes, and that money will have to come from me and you. So of course we'll end up finding the SMEs, the individuals, and even the low-income category of people really struggling to keep up with the high cost of living, in additional to the high taxation. Yes.
You've mentioned the high taxation. I mean, apart from the borrowing, the other side of it is the revenue that's supposed to be collected.
Yes.
KRA about 2.1 trillion, and then appropriation aid about 300 billion.
Yes.
Is it feasible?
Well, that's a question. That's a question we're asking ourselves. Because when you look at this current financial year, in light of the coming elections, of course, we're going to see massive disruption in the same. So we don't expect the economy to grow so much. Of course, they have targeted that it will grow with 6%, but pundits will say that that is not technically possible given the disruptions that come to the elections. And of course, we know our Kenyan elections are usually very heated. So it's as if almost every economic activity takes a pause for a bit of time due to the election. And of course, made worse by the crisis that we have in the Ukraine, given that there's a huge disruption in the supply chain channels. So of course, it will be a very difficult achievement for KRS to achieve the revenue targets in light of those circumstances.
KRS, as you've rightly put it, I mean, the CS of Treasury said it's going to be rebranded from KRA to KRS.
Yes, it's definitely.
When you've mentioned the Ukraine crisis, and when you think about the Kenyan situation, there is the fuel price increases that we've been facing. I mean, Kenyans, the high cost of living is truly impacting them. Now, for KRA to get this amount of money, what will they have to do?
Well, Betty, in my opinion, what KRS needs to do is to simply expand the tax base. Kenya, we have around 9 million people who are registered taxpayers, and most of the time you find that half of those people don't even file the taxes, and then you also have a huge chunk of the same people who file nil taxes. So if KRS can increase the revenue base, try to get more people in the tax bracket, then it will be very easy for them to achieve the revenue targets. But as it is, I find that it's going to be a very, very huge task for them if the same trend continues. At the same time, I think it's high time for them now to try and implement innovative measures for revenue collection. We have seen in the next, or rather in the last couple of years, them trying to bring, the digital services tax. They had also attempted to bring the minimum tax. Well, you could argue that those are innovative solutions, but I think they need now to bring those solutions to some of these informal sectors, whereby people are making a lot of money, but they are effectively not paying taxes. So I believe the solution, in as much as it might sound cliche, the solution is to expand the tax base so that the revenue targets can be achieved.
Expand the tax base.
Yeah.
Now, when you talk about the fuel prices, the CS, well, I don't know how big a gesture this was, but it was exempted from the increase in excise duty.
Yeah.
Do you think that will help?
Well, definitely. And of course, even other than the fuel, we just hope that the intended increase in excise duty, because I think he mentioned that there will be a 10% increase on certain products. We hope that that will not touch on the basic commodities. On the basic commodities, because of course certainly if that will increase the price on the basic commodities, or rather the excise duty on the basic commodities, it will end up now increasing the cost of living for the common mwananchi. Yeah.
And when we talk about the taxes, there's the sin tax, so to say, that was meted on gambling as well as alcohol, to be specific, advertisements. How is this going to impact the media space?
Well, I for sure expect that the media space will definitely try to pass that cost to the advertisers, because certainly being a sin tax is meant to discourage those kind of advertisements. But I don't think that the players in the industry, in the alcohol industry, in the betting industry, I definitely don't think they will stop advertising. Perhaps it might become more expensive for them, but I don't think that they will stop advertising. So what will happen is that cost will be passed upon to them, so it will become more expensive. But certainly in the long run, maybe the media houses might start feeling the pinch, because the moment you start paying for something very expensive, then it makes sense for you to try to scale down.
Kuriatani, in his post-budget briefing, he said that the budget was structured with the common man in mind. Did you read that in the budget?
Well, to be honest, I think that didn't come out very clearly or very strongly, because you'll certainly expect that if that was the intended purpose, things like tax reliefs would have been implemented. We are saying the cost of living is very high, so perhaps what the ambassador should have done is try to reduce the tax bands in a way that now the common mwananchi will have more disposable income to them, and in a way that will increase their spending power, and in the long run increase consumption in the country. So I don't feel that the current budget had the mwananchi in mind at all.
Kenya's budget for years on end has been in a situation where the expenditure is, the income is chasing after the expenditure.
Definitely.
We are always budgeting higher than we make,
Yes.
So this budget, being that it will be used by the current regime and the incoming regime for the most part, how do you think the incoming regime should tackle this issue?
Well, as I said, of course, it has been a challenge for a very long time. We have always been running what we call a deficit budget, whereby the expected expenditure is always higher than the revenue. And of course, I foresee that this might not change even for the next regime, because when you look at the statistics, we are saying that this is a 3.3 trillion budget, but we have a hole of almost 1 trillion shillings that needs to be filled. So I don't expect that this current budget, or rather the next regime, will be able to effectively deal with that. But as I had said earlier, in the long term, we should embark as a country to expand our tax base, because if we can get as many taxpayers into the tax bracket, then it will mean that the revenue collected in the form of taxes will really go up. So it might even get to a point whereby we don't need to borrow. We are able to raise all the tax revenues and finance the whole budget. So in my opinion, that should be the focus for the next regime in terms of tackling this deficit budget issue that has been there for many years.
For quite some number of years.
Yes.
There are some winners in this budget, of course.
Yeah.
The farmers received an extra 2.7 billion, I think, for subsidy on top of what was approved last week, if I'm not wrong.
Correct.
So how will this impact maybe even the cost of food?
Of course, the reason why we have the subsidy is because the cost of these agricultural inputs has really shot up. Talk about fertilizers, I think for the last 1 year, the prices have doubled. So we expect that with the subsidy coming in place, the cost of the agricultural products will definitely go low. And effectively, maybe in terms of production of food, the cost should be a little bit lower going forward. But I think this is also be sort of a long-term kind of measure. We should not expect that we will feel the reduction in the cost of food immediately, but perhaps in the next season, let's say a couple of months, we should start feeling the reduction.
We hope that we do. As we come to a close of this conversation, what would be your closing remarks?
Well, my closing remarks and my appeal to even the next regime is to try to put the common mwananchi at the center of these budgetary processes, because sometimes we can talk of so many things. We can say the economy is expanding, and sure, it might be expanding, but the common mwananchi needs also to feel the winds. They need to feel that really the economy is expanding, and they also have money in their pocket. So I would kindly urge the next regime to really put the common mwananchi at the center of this budget process making, and ensure that any change, any sort of policy change is done with them in mind.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Peter, for giving us your thoughts.
Thank you.
That is Peter Mwanza. He's a tax partner at Ronald's LLP, and we have been talking about the budget, the 3.3 trillion shilling budget that was released yesterday, and what it means for you.